times God literally preserves your life. Why? Why so? So that His plans and purposes will be fulfilled in our lives. I begin with Jeremiah 29:11, where He says, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for good and not for evil." Incident 1 in my life. I was riding our 1938 BSA motorcycle back in 1976 when I was 19 years of age. The motorcycle was exactly double my age. It was a cantankerous sounding old vehicle, but somehow I had mastered it. Getting it into gear without it stalling was an achievement in itself. No functional horn, but it made such a clattering noise that parents would quick drag the little children off the street when they heard me coming down the road on this BSA motorcycle. I would take, foolishly, at that young age, as many as 4 other boys on the motorcycle. 2 medium-sized guys squeezed in behind me and 2 little fellows on the tank, motorcycle gasoline petrol tank in front of me. So the 4 of them and myself, 5 of us. It was only the mercy of God that nothing ever happened to me or any of those boys. Number 2, why God preserves our lives. He has a plan and purpose for us. Escape from the police. I shouldn't be proud to say this, but this was in my young, impetuous days. Escape from the police. This one time, again 19 years of age, I dared to venture into town, not just our housing development, into town to drop a friend off. And on the way back at a major intersection, I found myself riding straight into the waiting, welcoming arms of a police officer and his constable. The officer's motorcycle was parked on one side of the traffic intersection. I was almost within arm's reach and slowing down when I realized I would be done for. In a split second, in a last-minute decision, I opened the throttle, turned my handlebar at right angles, and hightailed it out of there, turning into a side street the first chance I got, and zigzagged my way home. I even surprised myself. No valid registration, no valid vehicle inspection, no driving license, no nothing. I knew they wouldn't catch me when I drove off, and I would be lost in a maze of smaller streets by the time they even started their fancy bike and gave chase. I'm convinced they didn't even bother to try. They would have checked my registration, though, on the motorcycle and discovered that it had long since expired and wasn't even on the books anymore. Oh, the impetuosity and folly of youth, the thrill of the adventure and the joy of the escape, or in this case, should I say, escapade. But I learned to stay away from the town or city centers after that, not to risk too much. Number 3 incident, an old bull with sharp horns. One evening, one of my older brothers wanted to ride the bike. I had to help him get it started, and he rode with me sitting on the pillion. In an area not far from our house with some fields, this one cranky old bull with sharp, pointed horns was obviously unhappy with the cantankerous noises my motorcycle made. He appeared out of nowhere, the bull, and began charging behind us. Now remember, I was sitting on the pillion, so would likely be the one to be gored first. Needless to say, we were both stricken with fear, but my older brother panicked, and the bike stalled. I would have been done for by the bull, but for the fact that the moment the bike noise stopped, the bull also stopped in its tracks. Mercifully, I took over, trying to stay as calm as I possibly could. Dismounting gingerly, I asked my brother to get off and let me take over. We exchanged positions on the motorcycle. I kick-started the bike, putting it into first gear as soon as possible. No sooner did the cacophony of the cantankerous old motorcycle begin than the bull started charging at us again. You should have heard my brother yelling behind me, my God, hey bro. I know it sounds really funny now, but believe me, it wasn't funny at the time at all, not for us at least. Mercifully, I kept my cool, kept downshifting into second and third and finally fourth gear, and the bull stood no chance of catching us, gave up the chase. Whew. But God has a purpose for us. That's why our lives were spared that day. Number 4, a heartbreaking, all true incidences. Heartbreaking story of our one dog named Lassie with a shiny black coat. One day, I rode to the nearest gas station or petrol bunk, as you would say in different countries, to fill some petrol or gasoline for my motorcycle. When I was done, I started to ride home. Suddenly, I noticed our dog, Lassie, was running by the side of my motorcycle on the sidewalk. It surprised me that she'd followed me all the way to the gas station and I hadn't even noticed. I called out her name as she ran alongside me to the house, a distance of about 2 kilometers, about 1.2, 1.3 miles. She was happy as could be for the nice run, but suddenly she ran too close and into my bike. And before I knew it, her right foreleg caught under the metal footrest of my motorcycle and snapped like a twig. Oh, how it broke my heart. She yelped in pain and was hopping on 3 legs with her one dangling, broken foreleg. I called out to Lassie to hop alongside me on the sidewalk, and we finally got home while I rode slowly alongside her. I quick got Lassie into a minicab, rushed her to the local government veterinarian. Listen up closely. The experience was traumatic, to say the least, for Lassie, and shocking for me. I was only 19. The vet had 2 aides. They muzzled her first, gave her no anesthetic, neither local nor general, held her down on the table. In front of me, he snapped a wooden 12-inch ruler in 2 pieces, squeezed her broken foreleg between them, and wrapped it around with plaster of Paris to harden, and set poor Lassie. And I was just 19, with barely any money in my pocket and in shock. Lassie was quivering and trembling with pain, and they abruptly finished and told me to take her home. This was life for an ordinary person growing up in India in the mid-1970s, not the privileged upper class, mind you. I took Lassie home back in the minicab, feeling guilty for having caused her so much pain, even though it was purely an accident. I was instructed by the vet to leave the plaster of Paris on for at least 6 weeks, after which she said he could remove it. But I chose to keep it on for a little longer just to be on the safe side. She became her former happy self and would hop around on 3 legs and her one white leg with a plaster of Paris. Then the day came I removed the plaster of Paris by soaking and unwinding it. Lassie had no more pain, but her leg was straight and stiff, naturally, because it wasn't set properly. She happily hopped around like that on 3 legs with one stiff right foreleg till she eventually passed away. Incident number 5, why God preserves our lives. A friend of mine at the time, Brian, became enamored by my 38-year-old motorcycle. He wanted to buy it and own it. So we rode down to his dad's place. His dad was the retired Wing Commander de Warsop. He was a burly gentleman with a twirled mustache and a fairly gruff voice. He intimidated me, Brian's dad. He wanted to see his son Brian ride the bike for himself. So I started the bike and handed control to Brian, but the moment Brian put it into first gear, it stalled. We tried again. The same thing happened a second time. All the while, Brian's dad, the burly wing commander, is watching the proceedings. I then asked Brian to sit behind me instead. I kick-started the bike and shifted it smoothly into gear and took Brian for a ride around the block. We returned, parked my beloved 1938 Birmingham Small Arms BSA motorcycle, and came in to chat with Wing Commander DeWarsop. He looked at Brian, and then he looked at me. And then he made this pronouncement which I shall never forget. He said to me, "Andrew, I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but that thing there is not a machine. It's a weapon." He said, "That thing is not a machine. It's a weapon." In other words, I don't want my son to get killed. Obviously, there was no sale, but I took that as a compliment that I actually had mastery over this semi-lethal weapon. More real-life incidences will come in the sequel, part 2 of this, but I'm convinced that God preserves us because He has a work for us to do. And as His word tells us in Psalms 31:15, "My times are in your hand. Deliver me from the hand of my enemies, O Lord, and from those who persecute me." So there'll be a part 2 with some more interesting daredevil incidences in the sequel. If you haven't yet, would you subscribe to our YouTube channel, like, share, and comment below and hit the notification bell? Thank you and God bless you.